On a day that shook the nation, a terrorist launched a violent attack on former U.S. President Donald Trump, sending shockwaves through the political landscape. The incident not only endangered the life of one of the most controversial and influential leaders in modern history, but also raised urgent questions about security, political extremism, and the increasing threat of violence in public discourse. The attacker and their motive. The identity of the attacker quickly became a focal point of the investigation. Authorities identified the assailant as attacker's name, a radicalized individual with a history of extremist affiliations. Reports suggest that the attack was motivated by deep political animosity and ideological hatred, though conflicting narratives emerged in the aftermath. Some claimed that the assailant was acting alone, driven by personal grievances against Trump's policies and rhetoric, while others suspected a larger conspiracy. In the weeks leading up to the attack, social media posts and online activities linked to the attacker hinted at their growing discontent. Investigators found evidence of prior threats and radical beliefs that pointed to a premeditated plan rather than a spontaneous act of violence. The attacker's background, affiliations, and mental state all became subjects of intense scrutiny as experts debated whether this act was purely politically motivated or part of a larger wave of extremism gripping the nation. The attack and its immediate impact. The attack itself unfolded in a highly public setting, amplifying its shock value. Whether it occurred at a political rally, a public event, or a personal appearance, the moment of the attack was captured on live cameras and quickly spread across the internet. Panic ensued as security personnel rushed to neutralize the threat and ensure Trump's safety. The former president, known for his polarizing presence in American politics, became the center of global headlines once again, but this time as a victim of a violent act. Public reactions were immediate and intense. Supporters of Trump saw the attack as a direct assault on democracy and free speech, blaming political hostility and media rhetoric for fueling such extremism. His critics, while condemning the violence, debated the broader implications of political division and the dangers of radicalized followers on both ends of the spectrum. Political and social fallout. The attack reignited debates about political violence in the U.S., with lawmakers calling for increased security measures for public figures. Some blamed the toxic political climate for escalating tensions, while others pointed fingers at specific groups or ideologies. The incident also forced a reassessment of security protocols for high-profile leaders, particularly in an era where public figures are more vulnerable to lone wolf attacks. As the investigation unfolded, the legal system moved swiftly to prosecute the attacker. The court's decision to sentence the terrorist to death sparked further debate about justice, deterrence, and the ethical implications of capital punishment. This shocking event, while a moment of tragedy, became a defining chapter in the ongoing struggle between political ideologies and the fight against extremism in the modern world. Investigation and trial. The attack on former President Donald Trump sent shockwaves across the nation, prompting an immediate and intense investigation by law enforcement agencies. Authorities moved swiftly to identify and capture the attacker, ensuring justice was served and addressing growing concerns about political violence. Capturing the attacker within moments of the attack, security forces, including the Secret Service and local law enforcement, responded with precision. The assailant, attacker's name, was subdued at the scene, preventing further casualties. Eyewitnesses described chaos as the suspect was restrained while medics attended to any wounded individuals. Authorities wasted no time in transporting the suspect to a secure facility for interrogation. Initial questioning revealed little, as the attacker refused to cooperate. However, digital forensics teams quickly delved into the suspect's online footprint, uncovering disturbing evidence of premeditation. Social media posts, encrypted messages, and surveillance footage indicated that the attack had been planned for weeks, if not months. Gathering evidence, federal agencies, including the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, launched an extensive investigation. They combed through the suspect's residence, retrieving laptops, phones, and written materials that pointed to radical ideologies and violent intent. Investigators discovered a manifesto outlining the attackers' motives, grievances, and detailed plans for carrying out the assault. Further examination of security footage from the event provided clear visuals of the attackers' actions, leaving no doubt about their culpability. Ballistic reports confirmed the weapon used, while forensic teams matched fingerprints and DNA evidence to the suspect, solidifying the prosecution's case. In addition to physical evidence, authorities conducted interviews with family, friends, and known associates. Some testified that the suspect had expressed extremist views in the past, while others were unaware of their growing radicalization. This raised important questions about the warning signs of political extremism and how such individuals evade detection. The trial begins. With overwhelming evidence, the case moved swiftly to trial. The suspect faced multiple charges, including attempted assassination, terrorism, and unlawful possession of a firearm. The courtroom was packed with journalists, political figures, and members of the public eager to witness the proceedings. The prosecution, led by a team of federal attorneys, presented a compelling case. They played video footage of the attack, displayed messages retrieved from the suspect's devices, and called upon expert witnesses who analyzed the attacker's radicalization process. Key testimony came from security officers who apprehended the suspect, as well as forensic analysts who linked the evidence to the crime. The defense's argument. The defense attempted to argue that the suspect was mentally unstable and not fully aware of their actions. They called upon psychologists who testified about possible mental health disorders, suggesting diminished responsibility. However, prosecutors countered that the attack was meticulously planned, leaving no room for doubt about intent. The verdict and sentencing. After weeks of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty on all charges. Given the severity of the crime and its impact on national security, the court sentenced the terrorist to death. The ruling sparked mixed reactions. Some saw it as a necessary deterrent, while others debated the ethical implications of capital punishment. This high-profile trial not only delivered justice, but also reignited discussions about political extremism, security measures, and the role of law enforcement in preventing such attacks in the future. Court proceedings. The trial of attacker's name was one of the most highly publicized legal cases in recent history, drawing national and international attention. Given the severity of the crime, an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, the case was fast-tracked through the judicial system. The courtroom was packed with political figures, legal experts, journalists, and members of the public eager to witness the proceedings. Security was heightened as officials prepared for any possible disruptions. Opening statements. The trial began with opening statements from both the prosecution and the defense. Prosecution's argument. The lead prosecutor emphasized the premeditated nature of the attack, presenting it as a calculated act of terrorism. They argued that the suspect had not only planned the attack meticulously, but had also expressed extremist views online, proving intent beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense's argument. The defense painted a different picture, arguing that the suspect was mentally unstable and acted impulsively. They claimed that the attacker was suffering from severe psychological disorders, which impaired their ability to make rational decisions. Key evidence and witness testimonies. The prosecution introduced a vast amount of evidence, including surveillance footage from the attack scene, showing the suspect drawing a weapon and attempting to harm Trump. Digital evidence from the suspect's devices, including manifestos, online threats, and encrypted communications with radical groups. Ballistics reports linking the weapon to the suspect. Testimony from law enforcement officers who subdued and arrested the attacker. Statements from forensic psychologists who analyzed the suspect's intent, ruling out insanity as a defense. The defense countered with psychological evaluations from medical experts who suggested that the suspect suffered from paranoia, delusions, or severe PTSD. Testimonies from family members and acquaintances who claimed that the attacker had exhibited erratic behavior before the incident. Arguments that the attacker was influenced by external factors, including misinformation, societal pressures, or extremist propaganda. Cross-examinations and public reaction. Cross-examinations became intense as the prosecution dismantled the defense's claims of mental instability. Prosecutors highlighted the organized nature of the attack, arguing that someone suffering from severe mental illness would not have been capable of such careful planning. The defense, on the other hand, accused the prosecution of ignoring the attacker's mental health struggles in favor of seeking harsh punishment. The media played a crucial role in shaping public perception of the trial. Conservative outlets framed the attack as an act of left-wing terrorism, blaming political divisions and extreme rhetoric. Liberal commentators, while condemning the attack, questioned whether the justice system was applying a fair standard, particularly regarding the use of the death penalty. Closing arguments and verdict. In their final statements, prosecutors reiterated that this was a politically motivated act of violence with clear intent. They urged the jury to deliver the maximum sentence, arguing that a failure to do so could encourage future attacks on political figures. The defense pleaded for leniency, asking for life imprisonment instead of the death penalty due to the attacker's mental health. After hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced the terrorist to death, citing the severity of the crime and its implications for national security. Aftermath. The ruling was met with mixed reactions. Trump supporters celebrated the verdict as justice served, while human rights activists debated the ethics of the death penalty. Politicians on both sides used the case to push their agendas, some calling for stronger security measures for public figures, while others highlighted the dangers of political radicalization. With the trial concluded, the case became a landmark example of how the justice system handles acts of political violence in an era of heightened tensions. Death sentence announcement. After weeks of intense legal battles, the highly anticipated verdict in the trial of attacker's name was finally delivered. The courtroom was silent as the judge, in a solemn tone, read the decision. The jury had found the defendant guilty on all charges, including attempted assassination, terrorism, and illegal possession of a firearm. Given the gravity of the crime and the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, the court sentenced the attacker to death. The judge, in their final remarks, stated, "This court finds the actions of the accused to be an unforgivable act of political violence, an attack not only on an individual, but on the democratic values of this nation. The premeditated nature of this crime leaves no room for leniency. Therefore, in accordance with the law, the court sentences the accused to death by lethal injection." Final statement from the accused. Before being led away, the convicted terrorist was given the opportunity to speak. Their final statement was filled with defiance, refusing to show remorse for the attack. Some expected an apology or plea for mercy, but instead, the attacker justified their actions, citing their extreme ideological beliefs. Their words only reinforced the prosecution's argument that the crime was deliberate and politically motivated. However, their defense attorney quickly announced plans to file an appeal, arguing that the death penalty was excessive given the accused's alleged mental instability. Despite the strong ruling, the legal battle was far from over. Public reactions, supporters of the verdict, supporters of former President Trump, along with many conservatives and law enforcement officials, hailed the decision as a victory for justice. They argued that such a strong punishment was necessary to deter future political violence. Trump himself, in a public statement, expressed gratitude for the legal system's swift action, stating, "This is a clear message to anyone who thinks they can use violence to silence their opponents. Justice will be served." Critics and human rights concerns. On the other hand, civil rights activists and death penalty opponents criticized the ruling, arguing that capital punishment should not be used even in cases of political violence. Some believed that a life sentence without parole would have been a more appropriate punishment. International human rights organizations also weighed in, questioning the ethics of executing a prisoner under such politically charged circumstances. Political divide. The ruling deepened the already existing political divide in the country. While conservatives saw the verdict as justified, some liberals viewed it as an example of selective justice, questioning whether similar cases would have received the same punishment if the political affiliations were reversed. Media outlets reflected this division, with some framing the execution as necessary for national security, while others debated the fairness of the trial. Appeals and final legal proceedings. As expected, the defense team immediately filed an appeal, arguing that the death sentence violated the accused's constitutional rights due to their mental health condition. However, given the overwhelming evidence and the nature of the crime, legal experts speculated that the appeal would likely execution and aftermath. After months of legal battles and failed appeals, the execution of attacker's name was scheduled at a high-security federal prison. The case, which had already sparked national and international debate, reached its final chapter as the death sentence was carried out. Carrying out the sentence. On the scheduled date, security around the prison was significantly heightened due to concerns about protests and potential threats. A small group of family members, victims' representatives, and legal officials were present as witnesses. Media outlets around the world closely followed every detail, broadcasting updates as the final moments unfolded. The attacker was given one last opportunity to speak before the lethal injection was administered. Some expected a final statement of remorse, but the condemned prisoner remained defiant, reiterating their political beliefs and justifying their actions. Others interpreted their silence as an acknowledgement of inevitable fate. At precisely time, the execution was carried out, and within minutes, doctors confirmed the death of the convicted terrorist. The warden formally announced the time of death, marking the end of a chapter that had gripped the nation. Political and social impact. The execution sparked intense reactions across political and social spheres. Supporters of the execution. Trump's supporters and many conservative figures saw the execution as a necessary step for justice and deterrence. They argued that the swift punishment reinforced the rule of law and sent a clear message that political violence would not be tolerated. Some even viewed it as a moment of closure, particularly for those who had feared further assassination attempts on political leaders. Former President Trump released a statement saying, "Justice has been served. Let this be a reminder that violence has no place in our democracy." Opposition and human rights concerns. On the other hand, civil rights activists, international organizations, and some political leaders condemned the execution. They argued that capital punishment, regardless of the crime, was an outdated and inhumane practice. Some critics pointed to concerns about whether the trial was entirely fair, given the high political stakes. International bodies like Amnesty International and the United Nations expressed concerns, with some nations even criticizing the U.S. for continuing to use the death penalty. Some opposition politicians also warned that the execution might further radicalize certain groups rather than serve as a deterrent. Further consequences. 1. Impact on security policies. In the wake of the attack and execution, security measures for high-profile politicians were significantly increased. The government implemented stricter protocols for public appearances, improving intelligence-sharing efforts to detect potential threats early. 2. Rise in political tensions. The execution deepened the already growing political divide. Some extremist groups used the event as propaganda, claiming the convicted attacker was a martyr. Law enforcement agencies closely monitored online platforms for signs of retaliation or copycat attempts. 3. Legal and social debate on capital punishment. The case reignited discussions about the death penalty in the U.S. Some lawmakers pushed for its expansion in terrorism-related cases, while others called for its abolition, arguing that life imprisonment without parole would be a more just punishment. Conclusion. The execution of attacker's name marked the end of a high-profile case, but its impact continued to ripple through American society. It became a defining moment in discussions about political violence, justice, and the ethical implications of capital punishment. While some saw it as a victory for law and order, others warned that it might only deepen divisions and fuel further extremism. As the nation moved forward, the case remained a stark reminder of the dangers of radicalization and the fragile balance between justice and political conflict in modern society.